Good evening, members, and welcome to today's second session of the Overview and Scrutiny Board for Bournemouth, Paul and Christchurch Council. I think just before we move on, Claire, if you wouldn't mind just giving us the housekeeping messages. Thanks.
Meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Please could everyone present follow these ground rules. Only speak when invited to by the Chairman. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphones when speaking and please mute or turn off your microphone when you are not talking. If accessing via Teams and would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. Please refrain from using the chat function in Teams except for recording of the proposed motion. If a vote is required on any issue, then I will call out each board member's name in turn, or the vote will be taken by a show of hands. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, exit the building by way of the nearest signed fire exit route and make your way to the ground floor of the multi-storey car park. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and all devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I'll take agenda item 1. Apologies, please.
So we have apologies for this meeting from Councillor Al and Councillor Farr, and we have Councillor Trent substituting for Councillor Al.
Thank you. Members, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Hadley, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Howell has had to go for a family emergency, so I'm replacing him tonight. Thank
you, Councillor Hadley. Any declarations of pecuniary interest, members? I can't see any. Sorry. The end of year performance report for council is the third item. The corporate strategy update is due in July. That's the fourth item. And the fifth item, the council highway inspection programme, which we hope will incorporate the item that's been requested by a member on highways. But we have yet to finalise the arrangements for that, but that's what we're hoping will happen. And the last item is the council new build and acquisition strategy. So there's the items that we've got highlighted at the moment. Is there anything else that anybody else would like to raise or comment about those items, members? I know that I just talking about the floor plan. I did write to you all about the potential for moving the meeting times, etc. In the event. I had 5 responses, 3 of which answered the question, and those said that they were happy to leave it basically as it is for the time being. Just looking forward, I did ask the other day how many more of these major strategy papers that we were going to get coming through, and it does look as if they're starting to ease off now, and by the end of August, early September, I'm optimistic that we will have broken the back of the majority of them. All right, so in terms of what that means for meetings for the future and whether we need 2 or we can put it into 1, that remains to be seen. Of course, there was also the issue about, the role of the ONS and the potential for another committee maybe. That's something that's being addressed by Democratic Services, and in fact talking about that in a meeting next week. So this is going on in the background. So thank you for those that made their comments about the role and purpose of ONS. Those points have been taken on board and will be considered. Yes, Councillor Dedman.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I didn't reply, not because of laziness or lack of interest, but because as one of the new members, because we've only just got our seat for Christchurch Independence, I just thought I'd prefer to leave everything as it is for the time being.
Okay, and I think that was the majority view anyway, so that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rigby.
It's all right, thank you. Plan is just an item that I'd like you to put to the board to possibly consider bringing forward after summer, is that we bring the multi-partner summer response plan and how that's worked over the summer and review it within ONS to see how it would work going forwards as well in future years.
Yeah, I think that's good. We can put it on the agenda. We don't have to put a date on it necessarily, but we can do that at some point. Yeah, Councillor Slade.
Yeah, two things. The first thing is on item 7 on the forward plan, which is the maintenance of key destinations locations, specifically around Poole Quay. It says approximate date to be agreed approximately blank months from April. I just wondered whether there was a blankety blank checkbook and pen to go in there. And then just following on from the leader's comments earlier, I thought the idea or the suggestion around a piece of scrutiny on the use of digital was a really good one. I noticed we've got Lansdowne on specifically. However, I see the use of digital as much bigger than 5G. So I just wonder about the council's move to digital. Might be something that would be a really interesting scrutiny across cross-cutting. I don't know how people feel about that.
I'm happy with that suggestion. Members? Happy with that? Everyone's nodding. Nobody's against. Yeah. Okay. We'll think about a date later. The other date regarding the maintenance of key destination locations across BCP, including, I think the reason we don't have a date on it is because we don't know when it's coming forward from Cabinet, and we're not quite sure when that's going to come forward. So we'll keep our eye on that one. All right. So if that's, I think we're done with the forward plan. Then thank you. In which case we'll now move on to, I think, public issues, agenda item 4. Claire, do we have any items of public issues?
We do, Chairman. We have no questions or petitions, but we do have a public statement from Mr. Sprackling, who is in attendance at the meeting.
Good evening, Mr. Sprackling, and welcome. You wish to read out to the board?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Yes, this relates to the tree management across the BCP area. We were fortunate that the Victorians had the foresight to plant trees for future generations. Now these trees are maturing and they need better management. The council is often, sorry, I have to take my glasses off. The council quite often stipulates that new trees should be planted to replace those that have been removed. But the association's impression is that very little is done to monitor the outcome. The Borough of Poole had an enforcement policy which used to be actively pursued. Could this be adopted by the BCP Council, please? End of statement.
Thank you, Mr. Sprackling. Yeah, we don't debate these, but clearly some of the issues that you raise will come out in the debate that we'll be having when we come to tree management shortly. But so it will not get lost. It will, and in fact there are some other issues regarding audit and governance in this area as well, I think, that we need to consider. But whether we come back to it another time will probably depend on how the debate goes on tree management this evening. But thank you for making your statement. It's very much appreciated and also understood.
I will wait till item 6.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 5, scrutiny of transport and sustainability related cabinet. And we have a report on the council fleet replacement programme and sustainable fleet management strategy. I understand that Councillor Mike Green, portfolio holder for transport and sustainability, and Councillor Mark Anderson, portfolio holder for the environment and cleansing and waste, be here to present that paper to us. Good evening, Councillor Green, Councillor Anderson, welcome. Nice to see you again. Would you like to introduce your paper?
Sure, I'll kick off with that if that's all right, Chairman. This is a complicated paper, but I'm sure that everyone's going to agree that it's also a very worthwhile one. Also, it does contain an awful lot of figures. What I'm going to try and do, avoid them as much as possible so as not to overcomplicate them. Obviously, if we do need to go into some of them later, then we can do so. So just starting from the position we're in at the moment, we have a large and very thirsty fleet at the moment, which consists of just over 600 vehicles and actually a further, an even larger number of non-vehicle pieces of plant, which go all the way from trailers to large pieces of parked machinery. But this paper itself is concentrating only on the vehicle element of that. And our vehicles at the moment use over 1.3 million litres of fuel, predominantly diesel, per annum. And that produces around or consumes around 3,400 tonnes of carbon dioxide in emissions. Currently, there are only 13 electric vehicles in the fleet, and in line with our stated declaration on climate emergency, we know that needs to change. In an ideal world, of course, we'd just take all of our vehicles and replace them immediately with ultra low emissions vehicles, but there are some severe restricting factors in that. The first I'd point to is that the ULEV technology is still very much emerging. There are suitable electric vehicle replacements for some vehicles with some sizes, but that's not the case across the board. Even the electric vehicle technology is emerging, but also there's a potential for non-electric vehicles. We could well be looking in a few years' time at hydrogen powered for some of the larger ones, for example, and other technologies are still coming forward. We're also unsure about what the right way of going forward over the long term is going to be with all of our depots, and it would seem a bit foolish to convert everything to electric now when we know that there is an extremely good chance that we won't have the same sort of pattern of depot use in the future, because that would be sunk costs that we could not recover in many cases. So what we do in this strategy here is to come out with some form of a middle way, which does involve on some investment, some of which we are unlikely to recover, but allows us to make a very substantial step on our journey towards ultra low emission vehicles. And of course, the last thing is that there is plenty of life left in an awful lot of our fleet at the moment, and it makes neither financial nor carbon sense to be replacing them before they get to either at or just before the end of their natural lives. So what we put together is a planned and phased but ambitious strategy, and this that's being presented here is the first 3 years of that plan. As we go forward to 2030, of course, there'll be extra things that come in. And there are 3 main strands to the plan that we have at the moment. The first part is that we'll be upgrading the charging infrastructure availability at the Hatchmont Road depot to about 480,000 or 500,000, 480 or 500 kilowatt hours as we go forward, and that will allow us to replace the estimated 104 vehicles, which we know that we will be able to put viably into electric vehicles over the course of that 3 years. for all of our other vehicles, and these ones until they require replacement, we would be looking to replace the current diesel or petrol that they consume with hydro-treated vegetable oil. And when we take that, which is a low carbon fuel, and it's a drop-in fuel, so we don't have to adapt any of the vehicles to be able to do so. When we put that together, we believe that we should be able by 2024 to save 91% of the carbon emissions that are coming from our vehicle fleet. And overall, if you remember back to the climate change paper that we were looking at and our carbon plans, our scope 1 emissions, the ones that are direct use of fuel and pumping out carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, make up just over 40% of our, I think it's 42% of our total scope 1 emissions are made up out of our fleet, etc. So this should mean that about 40% or close to of our scope 1 emissions are eradicated in one fell swoop if we do it right. In addition to those measures that I've just suggested, that we will go forward with if this paper is accepted, we're also looking to put in a pilot for home electric vehicle charging, because a lot of our vehicles are taken home each night by the operators, and that would allow us theoretically, if we're looking at all the vehicles that applies to convert another 113 of them to electric. We're not proposing going ahead with that straight away. Probably over the next 3 years, there might be 8, 10, 12, something like that we put forward as this pilot. But the hope is very much that as we go forward, some of those light vehicles, we would not have to charge them at the depot and to have that sort of infrastructure there, because people will be able to do so at home. So that's the idea. And again, that's included in the paper. Although this is concentrating on the 21 to 24 period, you'll see that dotted around in the paper, there are a few references and tables which go out much further than that towards the 2030. And that's really to try to give people the idea of the overall picture, for which this first 3 years is going to be the element that we're deciding at the moment. By the end of that 3 years, we should hope to have a much better idea about exactly where we are on our depot strategy, and hopefully a much better idea about how the development of ultra low emissions vehicles has progressed. And so we should be able to update that. Indeed, the papers that you've got here, I would say the appendices and some of the tables are very much live documents. They are, as we see it at the moment, they are our best estimates at the moment. But I would expect, in the same way that some vehicles reach the end of life earlier than expected, some go on a little bit longer, some prices go up, some prices come down. I'd expect that to be something that does get updated in real time as we go along. But as we are at the moment, the best estimate of where we're going to be. Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether Councillor Addis has got more to add now, or whether to hang on.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes, please, Chairman, if I may. I particularly just wanted to talk about the refuse fleet and the hydrogenated vegetable oil parts of our programme. I think it's quite interesting to note that we are replacing 7 of the refuse freighters with electric vehicles. We've had one on trial, and we are now looking at expanding the trial. The cost of these vehicles is very expensive, so we don't want to immediately commit to electric if that isn't the right route. So we will do a thorough trial, and we will see how these vehicles work, and eventually either we will replace them with the rest of the fleet with electric or hydrogen, or whatever is the low carbon market fuel and process at the time. I'd also point out that if the other issue I wanted to raise was about the hydrogenated vegetable oil. This is a process that we're going to use to replace the diesel fuel. This is what they call a drop-in fuel, so it will be a direct replacement for the diesel. It will be made from sustainable fuel sources, so it will provide a zero carbon or close to zero carbon replacement for us. And the figures that we've looked at, Mike mentioned the 3,500 approximately tons of carbon that the fleet produces at the moment. And we're looking at reducing that by 2,666 tons just by using hydrogenated vegetable oil fuel. So that's an emission reduction of about 90%. So I'm very, very pleased to see this. We've done the trials. We've spoken to all the manufacturers, and the response we've had back is that they are very pleased for us to use it. We've had approaches from other councils who've seen that we're using it, and I think it's a great way to go forward while we wait for the alternatives to mature. And that's pretty much all I had to say at the moment, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of things that I was a little bit puzzled with on this report. One of them is that it mentions how problematical electric dust carts are, and I see they're being tried, and it mentions the hydrogenated fuel oil thing, but what is missing from the mix, unless I've missed it, is hybrid electric diesel, as is the case with some London buses. You've got some London buses which stop-start all day, so that must be quite a similar cycle of activity to a dust cart, and they basically switch on and off, and sort of, and that must save quite a lot of fuel. And I wonder whether the technology and the suitability of that has been looked at. That's the first part of the question. The other part of the question is the vegetable oil bit. It was going to be topped up by palm oil, and I would have thought that palm oil was not a very desirable thing to use, even if it's second-rate, second-hand palm oil. It's something that we should be doing our best not to encourage the use of, and actually we would effectively be creating a demand for palm oil by using that as part of the mix for the dust carts that are converted. So yeah, a couple of questions and all to do with dust carts.
So, okay, who wants to go first? There are two questions, so we'll take one each.
I'm happy to answer them, to be honest. And I know that Mark has exactly the same as I do. Yeah, yes, the different technologies have been looked at. Hybrid vehicles are used in some boroughs, but are not seen as the best way through. It's actually quite different having a hybrid bus to a hybrid refuse truck in the way that they work. But indeed, the London buses and most and the government is pushing now for them not to be hybrid, but now that the battery life is up to lasting a whole day, then to be looking at pure electric instead. It's been the life of the battery that is important. As far as the hydro-treated vegetable oil is concerned, the reason I look to my right is because that's if people don't know, that's where I keep my my main screen, which has the information on it. But there are two parts of the report that point out that the HVO that we will be talking about here, that's an easy way to say it, Tony, does not include unsustainable oils. It is accredited, it is certified as coming from sustainable sources. There is the potential, although I believe it's not from our current supplier, to be using some waste oil. But the supply chain must be absolutely traceable for it to get through the ZEMO process and to get the accreditation that it has. So I think we have no fear of that whatsoever. Are you happy with that, Mark?
Absolutely. I think you've answered it very precisely.
Okay. All right, was that Councillor Trent?
Yeah, I still struggle with using palm oil in any form because.
Okay.
Can I come back on that, Chairman?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Okay. The contract we set will have a a part that specifies that we will not use unsustainable palm oil in it. We will use fuel from sustainable sources, of which palm oil may or may not be part of it. It's made up of a mixture of different sources that are then put together, and then once they're put together, the sources of the fuel is looked at. This generates the carbon capture that we are using, and then it's certified for our use. And there are various levels, and the level we're looking at, we can assure Councillor Trent that there will not be any unsustainable palm oil in it.
Okay. Members, anybody else? Councillor Hadley?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for your presentation. It was interesting that Councillor Green started by saying he wasn't going to quote lots of figures, and then he quoted lots of figures. But it's the nature, unfortunately, of what we're looking at. But I'm looking at the 90% reductions in carbon monoxide, and I'm just really quite worried about that, because we're still burning stuff. We're burning vegetable-produced oils rather than diesel. And I'm looking actually at a paper from 2018, which suggests the reduction is about 30% in carbon monoxide, a slight increase in nitrogen oxides, and an elimination of sulfur dioxide, which is a good thing. So I just want to be sure that we're not overplaying the reductions and what we believe we're achieving, because I did see the 90%, up to 90% on the Nestle site, which is one of the producers of this stuff. And up to 90% could be anywhere between 1% and 90%. So I'd be a little bit cautious about this, although I think we're doing a good thing. I think I share Councillor Trent's concerns about if we create a good market in second-hand vegetable oils, does that mean that people change their vegetable oils more frequently, and the impacts on not just palm oil and the forestation, but also on land use in general and water use and all the other impacts that has. So it's a good step forward, but it's not nirvana, and I think we just need to be slightly cautious about our language. Thank you.
Councillor Green?
Yeah, thank you. And Councillor Hadley obviously is very well versed in a lot of this, and thank him for his help in getting here. We are happy with the number of 91%. Again, officers will be able to explain a little bit more, but just to ensure that that is the combination of the, I think it's, I'm doing it by figures in my mind now at the moment, that it's 2,661 tonnes that is saved by moving to the HVO, and a further 396 tonnes that is saved by moving to electric vehicles. And we do expect and hope that this HVO change is going to be a temporary one, because by the time we get to 2030, we are hoping that at least 85% of our fleet will be ultra low emission vehicle. So it is as we are going through, and particularly while we are continuing with vehicles which have not yet reached the end of their natural life, and it wouldn't make sense to scrap them early, and certainly wouldn't make carbon sense to do that, let alone financial sense. So by going to this fully sustainable stock of HVO, we should be able to achieve that 91%.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
I was just going to repeat the comment from Councillor Green that this is going to be a reduction in the fuel that we use as we go forward, as we move vehicles into the ultra low vehicles. So we're not going to set up a market, because our use of it is going to be depreciating, and hopefully by, as Councillor Green has said, by the time we get to 2030, we will not be using any of this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to keep hammering on about the HVO, but I'm going to abstain on this paper, because the HVO issue for me covers different bits. The sources of the oil for it, as well as coming from palm oil, sustainable or not, it does also use animal fats and fish waste and things like that, which I can't support ethically. So I'm just going to abstain from this. But moving away from that issue, I'm really pleased to hear that it's being looked at as a transitional fuel as we're going forward, but I don't think that really comes across that clearly in the paper. So it'd be nice to be able to say that that is transitional, and we're looking to come away from that by 80% in 2030, which is really good. And what I think is missing from this, and I think what you've got looking at the table in Appendix A, the Fleet Services Replacement Plan, and the timeline for doing so, and the number of vehicles which are being replaced, it to me, it's a little bit like for like. We're not removing any vehicles or changing the way which we would travel or encourage travel throughout the employees of the council and within the council itself. And there could be alternatives which could have been looked at for maybe deliveries along the seafronts, the pop-ups, things like cargo bikes, electric bikes, which we were discussing before this meeting actually here. I was just wondering what else has been looked at rather than just taking what we've got and looking at transition it to a sustainable alternative and actually looking at true alternatives as transportation. Thanks.
That's an interesting question. Councillor Green.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to look up the bits as we do, because there are elements in the paper. And the first thing just to mention is that, are we looking at alternatives to having those vehicles in the first place? Yes, you'll see the first item on the strategy itself. Once you get into it, it says that we are going to continue to be looking at it from a transformation point of view. And indeed, if you go back to the paper that was first presented to Councillor Anderson and myself back in November, when we'd just taken on the administration, and that was being prepared by the previous administration, if I remember rightly, that was talking about 700 plus vehicles. We're now talking about 611 vehicles, so it's absolutely being looked at. And if you go through to page 35 of the report, which again is within that within the strategy itself, you'll see that the paragraph says, as an organisation, we've already undertaken numerous initiatives. And again, we're talking about the promotion of electric bikes and electric cargo bikes, and that's absolutely something that we'll be looking at as part of the fleet. So I hope that I understand entirely Councillor Rugby's personal choice on the animal fats that may be involved in the in this, and his personal choice not to vote according to that. But I hope I can reassure him on all the other parts of this question.
Councillor Slade.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to go to something a little bit different. So I'm aware that Councillor Rigby really likes this policy and forgot to mention it when he had a chance to talk about it. I'm going to be a bit more controversial. So a couple of things, just talking about the hydrogenated oil, which I understand everything that you've said. I've read the report from Zelo, or this partnership group, and they said there is a risk around there actually being availability of sufficient fuel. And in the strategy, it talks about if there is a problem with the availability of fuel, that we can revert back to diesel. So I have a slight question about what is the likelihood of that happening, and therefore us not fulfilling our climate responsibilities by going back to diesel. My second point on exactly the same is I understand that there is no conversion factor for this HVO in terms of calculating the carbon cost for Scope 1 emissions under the BEIS GHG standards. Now, in English, that basically means that if, as I understand it, if we're trying to demonstrate that we're reducing our carbon footprint, there isn't an official calculation for this stuff yet. If that's the case, which is what the report suggests, are we confident that we are genuinely able to adjust our carbon output? The other question I've got is, you talk about replacing Euro 4, Euro 5 vehicles with Euro 6 diesel vehicles where necessary. Are we suggesting that we're going to put this hydrogenated fuel in brand new vehicles, or are we talking about the existing vehicles? And is it a good idea to buy a new vehicle and put something that's suboptimal in? And I will get to my other 2 points if that's okay. The next one is around home charging. I'm really uncomfortable with this idea. On the surface, it sounds fabulous, but I've got a few issues over the tax benefit for employees, about it being potentially discriminatory, because surely it's only going to be possible for people who have their own homes that can have pod points put on them. You're then using the person's personal electric, which could actually be really problematic if they're on key meters and things like that. So there's problems there about it discriminating between one member of staff and another. I'd be much happier in saying we have, as we heard earlier, 19 district centres and we have 35 wards, all of which have got public space in car parks, parks, recreation grounds. Why aren't we putting these facilities in public spaces where those vehicles can park overnight within a walking distance or cycling distance to where our staff live, and then we can actually have them used by the public during the day? For me, that feels a much more sustainable solution. So I'd be interested to hear about that. And finally, I was absolutely mortified to see in the proposal for vehicles in the year 22-23, 2 new mayoral cars. It's totally unacceptable to me that we're looking to buy 2 new mayoral cars at a cost of £90,000 when we have a pool of fleet cars that we could be using. So please, for goodness sake, strike that out, because I couldn't support something that has 2 new cars, even if they are electric.
Thank you. I think there's 4 questions there. I don't see any hands going up there. Councillor Green.
Always happy to, but actually I'll let Mark go first on the first couple, if that's all right.
Please go ahead.
I was going to pick up on the Euro 6 comment. Yes, we have spoken to all the manufacturers. We've spoken to the manufacturers of vehicles which we have that are under warranty at the moment, and they are all happy for us to use the fuel. It is a paraffinated comparable fuel, so there is no issues whatsoever. Vehicles will still remain under warranty, and whether it's a diesel 4, 5 or 6 engine, there is not a problem with using it. And the officers have been very, very clear and very studious in checking with manufacturers. I think there was one manufacturer who we have a couple of vehicles from which are out of warranty at the moment who hasn't come back to us, but we are waiting to hear from their main suppliers. We only spoke to the local supplier, so I hope that solves and resolves your query on that one, Councillor Slade. The HVO fuel, as we said originally, we are taking a belt and braces approach here. We are going to be using it in diminishing quantities, and we are going to be cleaning out the diesel tanks to take the HVO fuel. So even if there are shortages of the fuel in the short term, we will have a sufficient supply to cover us over that anyway. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. The home charging issue, there are members of our staff who don't actually live in the borough, so if they can use home charging out of the borough, I think that's probably quite a good idea. I would like to see charging, as you say, in some of the car parks, but we are discriminating against our staff who don't work in the borough if we only did that. And the other point about home charging is we are looking at a process where the use of the electricity is charged directly to the council. It won't be charged to the employer, so it will bypass them, so there won't be a tax credit in lieu or anything else. It will be a transaction that they have no say in, apart from the fact that we're charging the vehicle. The mayor cars, I'm sorry, Councillor Slade, I disagree with you. I think we do need to have 2 cars for the mayors, and I will carry on supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I think there was this confidence that we can actually reduce the carbon output.
Yeah, absolutely we are. And you know what, I've got a couple of extra things that I'd just like to add to what Councillor Anderson said on this. As far as the home charging being discriminatory is concerned, I don't think it is. And to be blunt, I'd rather just get on and being able to save the carbon rather than to tiptoe around some of the niceties. Where we are going to be looking to put in charging points in car parks, I would want them to be available to residents at all times of the day and night. So I think to have to rely on them being away from those points in order to charge up one where somebody's got a perfectly good availability at home for literally, we're talking about 300 or 400 quid to the cost of the council for the surety of having that car charged up. Personally, for me, that overrides it. And when we're talking about what overrides overrides things. Whether there is a conversion factor or not, and that isn't something that I was aware of. But again, I'm going to come back to the same thing, Mr. Chairman. I want to save the carbon. If it means that it doesn't hit our own targets and we can't do a press release on that one, so be it. We will know that we are saving the carbon. And that is what is the important thing to me, and that's why I'm going to be bringing forward this paper.
Yes, Councillor Say wants to come back on that. Thank you.
Thank you. You at all about the fact that it's, we've got to go out there and save the carbon. My concern is that actually we should be aware in the risks that actually there is, this may not currently have a conversion. So I would encourage you to engage with bays and actually, get it added to their list, because if we are going to genuinely be reducing our carbon, we should be able to demonstrate that we can do that. I would like to propose an amendment, Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment that we ask Cabinet to reconsider the purchase of new mayoral cars in the year 22-23, take it out of their plan and revisit it again at the end of the 3-year period. Seek a seconder.
I'm not sure if the sound has gone again, Mr. Chairman, if anyone can hear me.
Yes, I didn't use the microphone. I was just going to declare an interest that I may possibly be Mayor of Poole when the new car comes on stream. But I won't let it affect the way I vote.
Okay, there's no, sorry, Councillor Dedman.
Well, I'm not going to declare an interest because I'm not a mayor anymore. But I support the amendment. I think that it's an unnecessary expense for the amount of mileage that the mayoral cars do, and bearing in mind that the Mayor of Poole actually took over the Christchurch car, which had very little mileage on it. I cannot see the point of having these cars. It's quite an expense. It's, in my view, unnecessary, because the mayor can be driven up in something other than that car. If you have to hire a car, I'm sure it would work out cheaper, and it would certainly be more user-friendly. So, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Trent wanted to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a fact, actually, that we had a royal visit last week, and the mayor and the sheriff and everyone in the party made their own way in their own vehicles. The mayoral car was only used to carry the chains in, so so we managed with a royal visit without using a mayoral car. So it is something that we need to think about. Okay,
thank you, Councillor Kelsey. By the way, did somebody second that move?
Yeah.
Councillor Hadley did. Okay.
Chairman, firstly, I'll put Councillor Trent in his place. The only reason the cars weren't used last week for the royal visit was under COVID restrictions, where it's not allowed to carry passengers at this moment. So just to make you aware of that, for the reason that that's how it works at this moment in time.
I think I'm very aware of that.
Well, then you shouldn't make stupid comments.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to support that. I don't think we need 2 mayoral cars at this moment in time. The chairman uses the same car as the Mayor of Bournemouth does and the Mayor of Poole does. Whether we need a new one at this moment in time, I'm not sure. We could do with a car that would represent everyone and can be shared around amongst all of us. Bournemouth many years ago got a lease car from BMW, and that's what we've used for many years. So there's no need to spend 90 or 180 grand on 2 new cars, in my opinion. And as I am the mayor this year, that's my opinion.
Okay, can I just clarify, did your recommendation, was it to remove both of the cars or one of them?
It was to remove it from the 2022-23 budget to review, and then if needs be to put one in once the 3-year period is gone. I just can't see any benefit.
So there's just one, so we're talking about one car at the moment?
Well, it looks like it's 2 in 22-23. I certainly, I mean, if people were so obliged to say we should have 1, but we have a lot of cars already that can be used. I don't know why it needs to be a separate car.
Okay, so the move is that we don't have mayoral cars.
We remove it from the budget.
Okay, and we have a second of that we've had a debate on it. So all those in favour of that amendment? Oh, sorry, there's another one, sir. Councillor Green, you wanted to say something else? You're muted, Councillor Green.
Going again. I have no beef about when the mayoral cars are changed, but I would draw the attention again to the first point that I made as far as the replacement programme is concerned. This list is provisional and it will be done as and when the vehicles get to the correct end of their natural life. I do not know whether those mayoral vehicles are at the 1 year from retirement, 2 years from retirement, or 10 years from retirement, and what would be the most practical way of doing them. But this list is going to be constantly revised, and the principle behind it is that the vehicles are changed as and when they get to the end of their useful life. So I personally think that it's obviously the scrutiny board will the open scrutiny board will vote, but I have to say that I think it's a bit of a not penny pinching, just a bit of a mean and pinched amendment that's come here. You know, I'm looking at the paper that was given to us dated the 28th, the draft paper that came under Councillor Slade's administration, which proposed not 104 electric vehicles replacement. It proposed no more electric vehicle replacements. This is a massive change to the way that we have looked at. We are looking at this, and I think to try to belittle it and bring it down into something which isn't even a budget line. It is a list which is going to be renewed right the way through, and to try to make that the headline, I just feel it's very sad indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Can I come back?
Go on then.
Thank you. Apologies for keeping on coming back. I'm not going to play ping pong, but I would just say that a previous strategy would have come when we had first declared a climate emergency, when this work that the officers have now completed would have only just been started. So I think it's completely ridiculous to go back 2 years and say, what did we do then? I absolutely support the move across to so many vehicles, but if you have a replacement plan, and that replacement plan includes the spending in the year 22-23 of 2 vehicles for the mayoralty, then we should just take them out. If it's not set in stone, then there shouldn't be an issue with actually putting them in as and when. So it's not penny pinching. I think if you go all the way back to when we were Borough of Poole, quite a few of us who were members at that point did not support a budget line which would have replaced the mayoral car back then. In fact, I seem to recall we were asked to support money for a mayoral car, and we had to lose our mobile library service at the time. So this isn't something which I've just dreamt up for a headline. For many years, I have not supported having replacement mayoral cars. I think that they are outdated and unnecessary. We have some great drivers who can drive any vehicle. It doesn't need to be a mayoral car. So I think that the motion should stand.
Councillor Green, you wanted to come back again?
Yeah, Chairman, I won't argue with that, but I think I do need to point out that this isn't something that I'm referring to that was from 2 years ago. This is a paper dated the 28th of October 2020, where on paragraph, when Councillor Slade goes back to it, paragraph 714 was the one that talked about not replacing any new vehicles. That was when Councillor Anderson and I took this on, and we said that isn't good enough for this administration, and that what you have in front of you is where we have got to over that time. So I think that's really important, Mr. Chairman, to make sure that's clear. I said I didn't say that it was penny pinching. I pulled that back, but said I think that we really need to be able to look at what we are achieving here and try not to pin it on one tiny little thing when we are looking at something really quite exceptional here.
Thank you, Councillor Green. David.
Thanks, Chairman. I was just going to say, I mean, I pretty much support what Vicky's saying, but I think maybe we can just put it in, if we can put a caveat to say that with regards to the mayoral cars, this needs to be reviewed as and when they are planning on spending that. Don't count it out altogether. We don't know what the condition it is. I know that the Bournemouth Mayoral Car is very, very old now and is heading towards its last legs. It had a major investment in it about 2 years ago to get it back roadworthy, so it will need to be replaced. But it depends on what style of cars we buy as a fleet. If we have one really nice car in amongst the fleet, then it will be worth spending that money so that everyone can use it and not just have two cars that sit there for most of the time doing absolutely nothing. I think one of the other things we have to bear in mind is that as chartered trustees for Bournemouth and Poole, we pay, that comes out of our chartered trustees budget for the hire and use of that car, as does the chairman's budget. That covers part of the cost of the use of that car as well. So I think Councillor Slade is right in what she said, but I just think maybe we can do it as a caveat to say this money can't be spent until it is proved that it is necessary to be spent on the Mayoral Cars or Carver.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. But you're talking about an amendment to an amendment here. Councillor Edwards.
I think Councillor Kelsey might have answered it actually, because I wondered if the cost of the car, buying a new one when necessary, didn't come out of the precept that was put on for Poole and Bournemouth for the running of the Mayor's office.
Okay, are we all finished on this? Okay, before we go to that, I have a view on this too, and I think that what I sense is that there was an objection in principle to having mayoral cars, as opposed to necessarily the cost of it, or is it both of those?
It's both, but there is no evidence of need presented. There is a plan that puts it into next year's budget. You know, the portfolio holder has quite rightly said, you know, that this is a sort of, you know, list of wishes. It should come out until we're presented with a need. If somebody comes back and says, we need this vehicle for civic use, and this is the proposal, then I think that's a reasonable request. I personally don't think it is necessary to have a car set aside for the mayoral team. I think we have other vehicles that could be used. So principally, I've got no objection to them being driven if they've got to go to an event where they're going to potentially have alcohol or a very long journey and they need to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed having read their speeches. That's fine. But to have two dedicated mayoral cars at a time when we're supposed to be moving away from, from personal travel and think about the bigger picture, feels a bit ridiculous. So that's why the proposal was to take it out of the 22-23 list, and by all means bring it back in if you've actually got evidence that it's needed and that it's the right thing to spend it on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hadley, followed by Councillor Fear, then Councillor Dion. I really want to move on with this because otherwise we're going to be talking about this, and this is one element of a much bigger issue about the fleet replacement, which is multi-millions of pounds and a sustainable fleet. So we're getting into a bit of minutiae, frankly, on this. But Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, actually, it was a point I was wanting to make in a much wider sense in terms of demand management and transforming travel. We have an enormous programme led by the portfolio holder speaking to us tonight around transforming travel and getting people to think about whether they really need a car. And I think the Mayor's car is actually a very good example of how we travel, how we choose to travel, and the fact that it's there just means it always gets used. But we should be leading by example across the whole fleet, and some of that is about the things that Councillor Rigby raised about e-cargo bikes, and again leading the community by example and showing that we mean what we say and we do what we say as an organisation. So I think it's symbolic in that sense, but it is actually the wider bit about how not just the fleet management team, but all the service departments that use the fleet, how they can be persuaded to think about, do I actually really need to make this journey in this way? Are there, can I be using public transport? Can I be walking or cycling for short trips? And that's a much wider point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Charles. We'll be brief. You're very correct that there's a vastly bigger plan than just the Mayor's cars on this. So I would just like to say some common ground could be met. I appreciate what Councillor Slade has said. I do agree to an extent, but with the vehicles as they are at the moment and the way it goes, and this could be an example for the kind of bigger fleet, as as others have said, possibly if Councillor Slade's amendment is lost, then we support what Councillor Kelsey has said. I think that's much more robust with the finances. Thank you.
Mr. Dion.
Yeah, well, in 2018, I was the consort to the Mayor of Poole, and we used the car almost daily in terms of traveling to schools, to 100 birthdays, and oddly enough, I think the Mayor of Bournemouth at the time probably was just as busy. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say that the car is not being used. It is being used on a daily basis. But I would agree that we should cut the fleet. If we've got 113 charging stations going into homes, maybe we should be relooking, do we really need to have 113 personal use vehicles? Going back to what Councillor Hadley had also said, maybe there should be a relook of the different way of getting to work, or even that transportation route that they're taking. So I will defend the mayor's having used it personally. And by the way, the Poole one blew up. It was an old limousine from Australia that blew up, I think, 2 years ago. And I think they have a rental at this particular time. But we should look at reducing the fleet in general.
Thank you.
Chairman, can I just make a point of order correction? That's our car, Christchurch's car you've got in Poole.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and we were glad to give it to you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to come to a vote on this, or to this recommendation. Before we do, I do have a view on this as well, and the point that hasn't been made is that the Mayoral car actually means a lot to residents when it turns up for civic events. It's a special occasion. They want a special person, and they want a special car, and they want it to look smart and represent the best that the town has got. And that is something that you can't replace for an e-cargo bike, I'm afraid, Councillor Hadley. So I actually am totally against this recommendation, but it's for members now to decide. But I repeat what I said, we're losing the track here on what this is a major policy in terms of expenditure and sustainable fleet replacement. So I think it's a shame that we've actually had to deviate for such a long period into this matter. But we'll go to the vote now for the recommendation that Councillor Slade has made. So all those in favour of that motion?
7 in favour.
All of those against?
7 against.
7 against. 7 against. Well, I have the casting vote as chair, so I will vote against that recommendation. Where does that take us? To carry on with the discussion, I guess, on the rest of the paper. Does anybody, members, have anything further to add? Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, Chairman. I mean, I stick by what I said with reference to the Mayoral Cars, etc., and I still say that now. But with regards to the paper as a whole, I think we need to move forward with it. I don't think we can sit here debating it any longer. I think we just need now to move on with it. We've talked about that recommendation there. It's failed, unfortunately.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we should now just move on, Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Headley, do you want to come in first, and then I'll just finish off?
Thank you, Chair. It was just a quick point. Yeah, I mean, the bit about leading by example was important, but the other bit was around the electric charging points. And there's nothing in there about the car share scheme. So we have a car share scheme both in Bournemouth and in Poole. In Poole, that was used mostly for staff and not for the public. In Bournemouth, they were dotted around, but I don't see that in this strategy at all. And certainly in terms of the cars and vans, why are we not using that? Why are we not thinking in terms of multi-use? And we do need to, somewhere in the fleet, we do need to go with the e-cargo bikes for certain areas, and certainly the highways inspectors tested them and we're quite keen on them. So I think we do need to make it in part of the mix.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Green, or is it Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, it is me. I think on the it would probably be on the car. Well, either of us actually on the car sharing. I don't think that anything would be changing. We would continue to encourage there to be use of cars by more than one person. And I think actually just to come back on something that Councillor Dion said earlier, because it relates to it, these aren't personal vehicles that are being used. These are predominantly housing department vehicles that are being used during the day, and they need somewhere to go at night. We are only talking about sort of maximum probably a dozen over the next 3 years anyway, but it just seems that the home charging pilot is a sensible way to go forward with that and to see whether it works, whether there are any problems with it or whatever. But I certainly wouldn't see that in any way it would reduce the opportunity for car sharing.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of points. Oh, sorry, Councillor Anderson.
I was just going to come back on the comments about the e-cargo bikes. I know highways have trialled them and we're reasonably happy with them. The main issue for highways is that they would be useful for doing specific areas such as bridleways, and that they're happy with that. But for other routes and other places, they have to carry quite a lot of kit and they have to move away from the vans and the vehicles. And one of the issues they've raised is how to secure the goods and the equipment they are carrying, and if that can be resolved, then maybe the issue of cargo bikes could be more generally used. But for highways, they would consider them potentially for the byways and the smaller paths and roads.
Thank you. Just something I picked up. There's no mention in the paper of the strategy about how the fleet is actually managed, and maybe it's another paper maybe. But this is a very diverse fleet located in all sorts of different places. Drivers' times, maintenance schedules, repair records. How is this done? Is there a central computer system that all this is tracked on? Because there's no mention of it in the strategy in terms about how the fleet's going to be supported in the future. And as I said, maybe it's a discussion for another day, but I thought that would form part of the fleet strategy. Councillor Green.
I think I'm not sure again whether it's more Mark's or mine on this one, but certainly it's something that we can take away and look at. As I see it, these are yes, there is a big black book of fleet, and you can see on page 21, for example, the arrangement of how we're going to be taking out of which vehicles are going to be coming in with it, which department. There will need to be some centralized charging, obviously, where we're looking at the electric vehicles. Some will be possible to be charged at individual points, existing points. Some will need to be at the new points at the Hatchpond Road depot, etc. So there needs to be a coordination. That you're absolutely right, but we wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to say no. You bereavement have to come and follow all of this to be able to sort this particular thing out. So, but there is quite a bit in the first half of that strategy paper itself, the appendix, which talks more about the fleet management, and hopefully that will give some of the answers to that.
Yeah, thank you. It was that section that flagged it up to me, because it mentioned nothing about the way the fleet management department were going to manage the fleet, in terms of driving efficiency, in terms of the way the fleet is operated, you need a good fleet management system, and it needs to be computerised. I'll just come back to you in a minute, Councillor O'Neill. Just one last thing, and that was about the cost of fleet replacement. Clearly, there has not been a collection, or we have not been saving up in order to replace the fleet, because we're now having to use public borrowing in order to fund the acquisition of the new fleet. In the strategy, is there some kind of mechanism for ensuring that we don't have to do that again, and that we will always make provision for replacing vehicles when they're required? Councillor Green.
Yeah, again, I'm just looking for the paragraph that does point out. You're absolutely right that there were differences in the way that the preceding authorities looked after their fleet replacement. So there are that does have to be pulled together. We do need to get to the situation that we have a rolling programme to replace fleet, and also in this case to replace batteries as they come forward. One thing that we would expect is that the part of the cost saving comes is that of the maintaining of the electric vehicles, which looks as though it would be considerably cheaper than traditional powered vehicles.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Chairman, I was just going to ask if you'd like to speak to Mark Parsons, because he is the has the operator's license, and he can explain a bit more about how the fleet's going to be managed. I think that at this point in time, it might be useful if we can ask Mark to come in.
Okay, Mark, do you want to come in?
Yes, good evening, everyone. So Mark Parsons, the transport manager responsible for the operation of the fleet. So to answer your question, fleet manages the assets by for a fleet management system called TranMan. So that predominantly looks after our O licence compliance work to ensure that we're following the letter of the law with legality. But it also looks at maintenance costs, replacement costs, and time. But for actual use of vehicles, I mean, services understand their services better than fleet do. So we look and we help and we advise the service teams on how to get the best out of the vehicles they're running. And that starts with, as we go back to looking at the replacement plan, what is it that do they really need a vehicle to start with? What are the alternatives? Are there sharing alternatives? Are there vehicles across the services that we manage that could be utilised by more than one service? So all of this goes into the preamble before we even start to look at replacing the vehicle, even though it's listed on that plan. I hope that answers the question.
Yep. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Did you?
Yeah, I'll just make a comment.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's by word of advice, really. I know through industry contacts that the reconciliation of usage and driver efficiencies where it's attempted on a manual basis can be very difficult and leads to a lot of discussion and controversy. There is a system that is rolling out globally called pay-through. It avoids manual reconciliation. It will assess public-private home office charging. It takes away the manual reconciliation. It gives all the data you want on driver efficiency, and I understand could be integrated with your own management system on vehicle monitoring. Apart from accuracy, the other opportunity it has is to advise on strategy because of the detail of the data that it can generate. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor O'Neill. Okay, members, is that anybody else? Did you want to come back, Councillor Anderson?
Chairman,
No.
I would just say that I'd like to thank Councillor O'Neill for his comments and certainly assure him that Councillor Green and myself will talk to Mr Parsons and the rest of the staff about his comments and see if we can take them on board.
Great, thank you. And there are a number of other issues that members have raised tonight which will give you some thought, I guess, particularly in terms of the shared fleet and reduction in numbers. So thank you, members. We'll bring this conversation to a close now and we'll move on. And so thank you very much, Councillor Green, Councillor Anderson. I don't think you're involved in the next one, so I think that's it for you tonight, is it? Good night. Thanks for attending.
Great. No, I'm here in case you need me.
Cheers.
The trees.
Okay, so moving on then to agenda item 7, sorry, I beg your pardon, 6, tree management across the BCP area. Yeah, now this was something that was raised by a member, and some time ago we set out a number of questions that we did receive some answers to, but they've never been debated in this board. We also had a briefing from Councillor Anderson earlier in the year on some of these issues, but now is the opportunity for us to have a good talk about the way trees are managed across the BCP area. And there are some issues here for us to talk about. So having said that, and the papers, I'm sure you've all read this, so we'll go straight. I don't think we need to ask for an introduction. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I think the paper speaks for itself and the answers are there, unless you have something you do want to say.
Yeah, but I have a few words I'd like to say because hopefully they may be able to help in your conversation. The first one is that we have a green infrastructure strategy which we are aiming to introduce in March 2022. As this will be our overhaul our umbrella paper and strategy. This would be the top level. Under that, we will be having a series of other papers, one of which will be a tree policy, which we're aiming to introduce in August to September 22 as well. And then under that, we will have contractual arrangements. So we're looking at the whole of this structure anyway. I'd also point out that we do have existing tree policies for the 3 different areas in the conurbation, and we are working on those. The Bournemouth one has just been finished, so that's fairly new, and we're looking at trying to use them and come up with the best from all of them. We are going to be looking at a tree planting policy, and we have planted 10,000 trees over the winter. The other issue I would raise is I do have a link to the consultation process on the strategy, the green infrastructure strategy. Now I can either read that out or I can paste it into the sidebar for inclusion in the minutes if you would like. Chairman? Sorry, I can't hear you, Chairman.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to ask, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Councillor Trent now if he would open the debate on the trees, as it was he that originally raised this as an issue. So, Councillor Trent, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it seems to have gone back quite a long time, and many aspects have changed or come to light since then. I think I'll start off because I made some notes which I shared with a few people. To me, the existence of the green infrastructure strategy is the perfect time for a scrutiny of tree policies to be going alongside, because I think it helps inform it. What I don't like about the way things have gone for some while now is that these strategies and policies come before us 10 days before they go to Cabinet, and some of them may go to Council a few weeks later. And I do think we need to get amongst it. I was concerned because there were issues being raised with me about the tree management side, but there's also, and I'm pleased to hear that we've planted 10,000 trees this winter. We have got quite an ambitious target of planting more trees, and I think that we need to find the best possible way to work with residents. We need to give advice to residents, work through our housing provider or providers, as the case may be, to have more advice and involvement in what sort of goes on. And because the thing with the tree policy and why it's so important to get it right is that there aren't very many ways that we can mitigate climate change, and even if we do a fantastic job locally and get our carbon down to zero, we are still dealing with a surrounding world that will be struggling to bring their carbon emissions down. And of the 3 possible ways of absorbing carbon, trees is the one that we have most influence over and we can manage. We have seen a lot of good mature trees taken down for various schemes. Quite a few disappeared with Paul Park. I noticed that more trees have been taken down than was originally envisaged in the Wallisdown Road scheme. So we are we are taking trees down and not necessarily replacing every single one of them. And when we do replace them, they are trees that take a long time to reach the same level of carbon sequestration, that's probably badly pronounced, than a mature tree. So I do think we have got to look at the management of the trees we've got. We've also got to think about our residents and issues they might have with trees. It's quite a complicated issue. It's not a simple one. In fact, there's almost 3 scrutinies rolled into one here. But we've got to look at the whole picture and come up with the best possible sort of range of policies on that. And I think we should be feeding into it via a working party or something along those lines, so that we are engaged in it as it goes along, and we can influence it, and we can take on board people's views and opinions. I asked half a dozen people by email yesterday whether they had any thoughts about this, and one came back and said, well, when he worked for local government in Devon, but they had a policy which encouraged residents to plant trees in their garden, and the council provided trees and gave advice on it and so on. So there are lots of things we could be doing, but I think it's something that needs to be sort of opened up, because I think we need to prioritise what matters most. But as I say, I do think it's a case of tree management and getting people engaged more in planting trees and protecting trees, and moving away from the current situation we have, where you can go down a road a couple of weeks apart and you will notice yet more trees have been taken down by residents to turn their gardens into car parks. That's something else which is happening. So we need to be reaching out and encouraging and persuading as well. We need to be setting an example and helping other people to make the best possible choice with their trees, because these are precious, these are valuable, and we need to do our best to protect them.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Trent. Yeah, you touched on a myriad of issues there, and of course that I'm sure that we'll be told that there are a number of ways that trees are managed across the conurbation, albeit in different ways because of the the historic three different councils doing it 3 different ways, and that's still yet to be brought together. And of course, Councillor Anderson has also said they're working on the policy that will bring all of this together at some point. But you've raised some very interesting issues, particularly those about replacement of trees that have been taken down, tree planting policy, residents' issues and the way trees are managed, and the general tree management mechanisms that we have. So that there are a number of areas, and they're all very big. They're big areas. We could talk about trees for hours, I'm sure. But let's just let Mark Anderson just come back in and give his initial response to that opening statement from Councillor Trent, and then I'll go to Councillor Hadley, then to Councillor Lewis, and then Councillor Fear. And those are the 3. Oh, and then Councillor Cox has just come in as well. And anyone else at the moment? Oh, and Councillor Rigby. Okay, so that's the speaking order. So, Councillor Anderson.
Chairman. There's an awful lot that Councillor Trent has raised, and before I carry on, I just ought to mention that he said there's no discussion, no debate, and no involvement from other councillors. And I forgot to mention that on I think it's the 3rd of August, we are having the Green Infrastructure Strategy where all councillors will be invited, and we will be asking for their views. So hopefully that will cover it. I've got with me a representative from planning, our strategy officer for the green infrastructure, and the operations manager. I don't particularly intend to call them at this point in time because I think Councillor Trent's comments were sort of fairly general, and it's I'll call them when we need very specific answers.
I guess it's probably worth just asking that all those areas that he's raised presumably will be encompassed within this tree strategy that you are producing.
Okay, we have someone from planning here to look at the enforcement of tree TPOs, etc., and the replanting of trees have been put down as a result of planning. We have the tree strategy officer, we have the council's green infrastructure strategy manager here, who is looking at the global side of the green infrastructure, not just trees, everything, and is looking at how we are going to combine the three policies. And we also have the operations manager who's here to talk about the contractual arrangements and how we're going to look after them. So yes, we are concerned about the replacement of trees on our highways. We're concerned about replacement of trees in the open spaces, and we are concerned and aiming to come up with a combined tree policy for all three towns in the conurbation, and the schedule for that, as I said, is autumn next year. So we're in a very early stage at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So I think this input at this stage is probably quite useful. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think John Sprackling made a really useful contribution at the start in terms of the Victorians and actually thinking ahead, because in terms of climate mitigation, when you look at Mediterranean countries, they have an awful lot of trees for shade as well as for carbon sequestration, and also as wildlife havens and wildlife corridors. I should be thinking big across the area for that. I was involved in planting 500 of those trees this year at Sturt Green, and we got the community involved, and it was brilliant in terms of obviously that event, but also getting them to love and want them, because it was an area where they could very easily get trashed. So I think, involving the community, making sure they're absolutely a part of it is really key. But I think the other bit is, and it is in the answers, the way in which we deal with trees in the public realm, where we manage them over their lifetime, and they do get to a point where they need to be chopped down, and people always fight about every tree. We should be fighting about the succession planning and about the new trees to replace the old trees and making sure that happens. I also think in some of the highways but also in some of the planning work, there's obligations to put trees in, and then before they get a chance to get to maturity, they're chopped out because something gets changed, or the residents find their view slightly obscured, so they chop them down on the sly. And there's a real challenge, I think, for us in terms of the planning bit and the private estate, and what we can do within the public realm. And I think we do need to bring together, as Tony was suggesting, the bit about encouraging communities to plant trees in their gardens, suitable trees, small trees, because actually the other problem is more and more housing, there's less space for these trees to actually grow to their magnificent beauty. So it's about the appropriate tree in the appropriate place, and what guidance we can give to the wider public to meet our carbon commitments for the whole community, not just for BCP Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get some clarification on the numbers. So we heard in the opening statement that BCP planted 10,000 trees over the winter. I don't think that's actually correct. My understanding is that only about 1,600 of those have been planted so far, and that the 10,000 figure is the plan for the whole of 2021. So we haven't planted 10,000 trees at all. That's not true.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Anderson?
I'm trying to find the numbers. I can't find the numbers at the moment, but I am happy to take Councillor Allison's comment that they haven't been planted yet. I know we were talking about 10,000 this year. I was hoping that they'd be planted in the winter, in the dormant season. So I can ask an officer if you wish to get a full figure, but if that would help.
Would you like an officer to, because it's such a big difference in the number? Yeah, if there is somebody there that can answer the question.
Okay, can I ask Mr. Rowland to come in?
Yes, hello Mike.
Hello. Yeah, we haven't planted 10,000 of all 10,000 of those. All of the trees that we were given under the Urban Tree Challenge Fund, and I think that's around 6,000 or something like that, have all been planted. There are a number of trees planted on the Hicks Farm estate as part of hedgerow recreation. They're all planted. There are some more that were funded by the current administration that we wanted to plant at Iford. We need to change our countryside stewardship agreement to allow us to do that, and so that will have to wait until the next planting season. Otherwise, we'd be in contravention of our agreement for countryside stewardship at Ideford Meadows. So yeah, we are planning to plant all 10,000, but some will wait till the next planting season this winter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Okay, Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like just to thank the member of the public again who came with their input earlier before this item. I think it's really good to see public engagement on this really important issue, so thank you very much for coming. Like I say, it is a big issue, and what Councillor Trent kicked off with, there was a variety of interesting facts. I mean, this paper, going through it, there were some interesting numbers in there, I thought. So I would suggest a working group that possibly Councillor Trent, as he brought this item, could go away and steer, and other members would be welcome to join him on that quest to find more information on those particular issues, and obviously working with the Cabinet member, I'm sure, would be happy to help. And also, if Councillor Trent would like to take this up as his kind of passion, because I believe it is a big issue, for him to definitely attend that 3rd of August meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fear. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a question I want to ask, and I want to get the answer. I'll follow it up. Is that I noticed one of the answers here is that in total there should be 14 staff. Actually, how many staff do you have currently, and how many vacancies are
there? Councillor Anderson.
I will ask Kate Langdon if she'd like to come in and answer this. I know we're looking at filling some of these vacancies. I don't know exactly where we are at the moment with it.
Kate Langdon.
Hello.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello. Sorry, I'm not directly up to speed. Andy McDonald, are you able to? Because some of they split between planning services and ourselves and environment. Andy, I'm not sure if we're light of anybody at the moment, are we?
We are on the ARB side for the operational side, where I think we had 7. We're currently missing 2 vacancies, but we've got permission to fill 1, Kate, at the moment. So we're still working on that along with the smarter structures element. And I can't answer for planning for obvious reasons. So.
Okay, so if you don't write 2, that's a significant proportion of the officers that you need in.
We've also got Caroline Peake here who can answer for planning. Peach,
Yes, I've got responsibility for trees and urban design and conservation. On the planning side, I think the paper that members have had does sort of explain the latest in the planning situation. We have had vacancies on the planning side for our officers. We're at the moment we're sort of filled, other than we have a vacancy which is filled by a temporary, somebody taking it up temporarily. So we're still looking for a permanent member of staff there, but we're technically up to numbers at the moment currently.
Councillor Cox.
Well, it's still down by 2 as the last time I looked, which is a significant portion of the staff that are involved in tree management. I know this because I asked. I've reported a ash dieback case in Christchurch to be told that there is nobody that is able to deal with Christchurch at the moment. They're having to rely on somebody in Bournemouth. And on the basis that it's disease and quite important that it gets dealt with quickly, then I suggest that you should concentrate on it's all very well having these wonderful plans and management strategies, but if you don't have the staff to do them, then you're not going to be able to do any of them, or do very little of them.
Thank you. Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, having looked at this report, it is really interesting. I'll back what Councillor Fear said, I think, and Councillor Trent as well, and getting a working group together, I think, to put some real effort into this and looking at everything which needs to be looked at. 'Cause in the space of what we've got here, an hour or so, it's a huge amount. It's a huge amount of work. So I think if there is a working group, then I'd be very supportive of that and look to get involved. One question that I've got is, this triggered me to go and look at TPOs and how a TPO is actually made. And managed to find the government website is you get a request, someone goes out and have a look at it, and you decide if the tree or woodland has an amenity value. And I think you can argue that potentially every tree's got an amenity value with it, you know, producing oxygen and that thing that it does. But as Councillor Hadley said, some do need work and there needs to be a succession plan. So, but my question is, what, or if any, proactive work do we do on TPOs on privately owned trees, or do we just sit back and wait for people to come and ask the council?
Councillor Anderson?
I don't know if Ms Peach would like to answer that on behalf of planning, because I think this is a more of a planning issue.
Yeah, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it's on TPOs. In the main, it's a reactive situation, I would say, where, because making of a TPO, one of the things that we look at is actually sort of around whether a tree is actually under threat or not. So you might have perfectly good trees that are looking sort of beautiful and providing a lot of amenity, but they may not be under any threat at all. They're under good management. So we're not looking to sort of TPO absolutely everything, because that's not kind of what we're about, and what the legislation is sort of empowering us to do. But obviously where we have concerns, we'll look to try and protect trees that are of sufficient quality.
Does that help, Councillor Rigby?
I suppose where some of my worry comes into it is, like, saying a tree isn't under threat. We could have a really well managed tree in someone's private garden, and we have it a lot in Winton, where infill properties will be built and the bottoms of people's gardens are sold off to developers, and there might have been a tree that's been there for 60, 70, 80 years, who knows, and because it's never had any sort of TPO put against it, it's been well looked after, people can just come in and develop there straight away. And I kind of think that's like missing a trick somewhere, where we are losing valuable amenity and green space because we haven't got this proactive way of going about it, or at least there could be some sort of way to get TPO if it's looking as though mid-development may happen, something like that. Again, maybe it's something a working group can look at. Thanks.
Thank you. I might be able to just, I'm aware there is a degree of proactivity, or there has been in Bournemouth, regarding protecting trees. Very often it is reactive, I accept, but my understanding is that the officers are looking at on an area by area basis. And I'm certainly well aware of a number of TPOs that are on trees positioned in resident that have been protected as a result of the TPO. But equally, I do recall one particular tree in Southbourne that was probably 200 years old, and it was the most magnificent tree, probably the only tall tree in the whole of the ward. And somebody wanted to build a nice house there, and they just chopped it down, and it was just too late. We couldn't save it. They were quite within their rights to get rid of it. And so I would agree with you entirely that we do need, if we can, to be more proactive in the way that we look at trees in residential areas. Maybe that's something that working group, we'll come back to the working group in a minute, I think. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I'm worried about this idea about this not protecting trees. I've just been on the website and actually I'd love to protect a tree at the bottom of my garden that I think is technically in my neighbour's garden, because it has huge amenity value. Now, it probably is never going to get developed, so you'd argue that it's not under threat. But actually, it creates masses of shade in 4 gardens. So if you don't like that shade, you're going to take that tree down if it's not protected. And yet, we wouldn't know about it till the chainsaws arrived. But if you go onto the website and actually put on, how do I get a tree protected? There's nothing on the website. You can find out how to do some work on a tree that's already protected, but it feels to me completely wrong that we're not actually helping people to, surely not taking down safe trees is better than having to put new ones up. And just to make the comment that Mr. Sprackling raised earlier on about the Victorians and the sort of advanced thinking, I absolutely hear what I think it was Councillor Trent said about small trees in gardens, trees that are appropriate for their space. But we mustn't forget about big trees too, because I'm really worried we're planting 10,000 trees, but they're not what I would describe as trees. They're whips, I think they call them, don't they? And I'm not convinced that we're going to end up with many trees at the end of the day. And if we're going to have trees that serve a good purpose within a reasonable amount of time, that provide habitat, that provide shade, that provide decent sequestration, surely we need to have big trees as well as small trees. So there doesn't seem to be anything about that. And I notice in looking at the UK urban tree canopy cover map, I don't think anything's been done locally about including BCP area in that. It's Woodland Trust, the Forestry Commission, all the main people are involved with it. But you look up our area, you can't find out what our tree coverage is. And I wondered whether you personally had a goal as to, are we looking to double our coverage? Or I know there's some argument about in Heathland you don't want trees. So are we making a commitment to double nature rather than double coverage? Because if you don't know what you're aiming for, you don't know if you're getting there. And finally, I have to make the point about people whose boundary is on our open spaces. It's particularly problematic when you boundary heathlands, Camford Heath. I dealt with some, and Sean will say the same. So many people who historically the council would have maintained the trees that are on somebody's boundary where it's the council side, and where people's lives are absolutely blighted by the council no longer taking action. So I think we need to think about the fact that these trees might not have been very big when they're planted, but 40 years on, they're having a huge impact. So can we make sure we're thinking about the impact on people as well as the council?
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Councillor Anderson?
As Councillor Slade has indicated, there is a conversation to be had about the difference between how you sequester carbon and the fact that heathlands are a very, very good method of storing carbon. And in fact, I made that point at council when we could meet as a council physically. But she's also right about tree cover. I know that we are working with the Woodland Trust and we are planting trees with them. We've made a comments about the trees at the moment. And as for the numbers we're going to plant, etc., I don't think it's my decision. I think it's a decision for the whole council, and that's the whole point of having the green infrastructure strategy. And that's why I've put in the sidebar the link to the strategy for members and hopefully the wider public to contribute to this conversation. And so, yeah, I think it would be very. I can't think of the word. I think I do not believe that I, as a single person, should be making the decision for the calibration. I think we want to know what everyone wants to have a say on this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Is there anybody else? Jackie. Oh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, I think quite often people have a lot of misinformation about TPOs, in that, oh, you can't prove them, you can't do anything with them. And that is totally wrong. And that all you need is you need to get planning permission, same as you do in any conservation areas. I live in a conservation area. I have trees with TPOs. I've had permission to prune them because they've got too big. So I think that needs to get across to the public that you can do works on trees with TPOs. And the other thing is, we do need this proper management of trees, especially some of our own trees. Councillor Bartlett and I have spoken to tree officers many a time about some of our own trees that have got too big, the branches are dead, they're falling onto people's property, and they need to be attended to. So I'd like to see that in this strategy, that we look after some of our older trees that are perhaps coming to the end of their life, but they need to be managed properly before they become a danger to members of the public and their property.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Kelsey.
Thanks, Chairman. Trees are a difficult situation, aren't they? A difficult topic. You and I have dealt with them over many years on planning board and things. We've had many people coming in requesting to have trees felled because a bird's nest fell out and it upset their children. For example, you know, it's nature, it happens. Branches fall off trees every day, all day long. It's nature, it's going to happen. We can mitigate some of it by doing a bit more work on some of the older trees, but it just happens. It's what life's about. You know, it's how we progress. I think we do need a tree strategy, and I quite agree. I think a working group would be a great idea. Certainly, from a planning point of view, I think when we allow new developments, it may be worth us trying to incorporate something where when we're replacing trees, they have to be semi-mature, not just little spriglets, because you're quite right, Councillor Hadley, that, you know, it takes them yonks to grow to what they were producing before they were removed. So I think we should maybe try and get that included within the local plan, even at some stage in the local plan group, that any replacement trees around public properties, and even in our own grounds, should be semi-mature. I know they're more expensive, but what's a few pennies, you know, when we're talking about the future of the planet? So I think that does need to be mindful of that. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Of course, it is we're all on the granting of a planning consent that you can condition the maturity of the tree that you want to be planted. Councillor Gabriel.
Oh, sorry, just on cue, my team's call's just dropped out. So it's just to echo what Councillor Edwards and Slade were saying. So on the flip side, obviously, oh, sorry. Sorry, just on the worst possible time, my team's link has just dropped out. It's just to echo what Councillor Slade and Edwards had said. You know, on the flip side of what we want to protect trees, I think we need to recognise when we review this policy of some of the negative experiences it gives our residents, particularly those living on heathland, for example. We manage and own the trees behind their properties, and it can cause, you know, considerable disruption to their lives. And I can think of two particular cases on the heath where myself and the residents thought actually there were safety issues there that I found I struggled to get any action from that. So it'd be really nice when we look at this policy on the flip side of that to see actually how us as councillors can really represent our residents to get these issues sorted out, because it would really, really make a difference to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Councillor O'Neill.
I suppose really an endorsement of what Councillor Kelsey was suggesting. I'm looking here at 9 tree applications for this year, recent applications, involving some 20 trees, and in only 2 cases is it saying fell and replace. And they're all to do with property and property development. So I think we do need to be more ambitious in our demands. But also, I think we need to be more consistent in how we deal with our public. And I've got recent experience of that. I've actually moved because of trees. I had one of our tree people come round. I've got 9 pine trees and 3 oaks on the property I've just vacated. The pine trees, he agreed, were not good specimens. The pine cones that have dropped have caused car damage, £800 in 1 year, £750 in the previous year. A branch fell off and nearly decapitated a worker that was on my site. The guy said, yes, we will be taking those down. He then took that back to the office. And then I got a letter saying, no, you can't take them down. We think they're okay. So there's not even a consistency in the view. And I do question whether we lack ambition, and indeed with a lot of these actions, what is the oversight that takes place to ensure that the right decisions are being made, or is it just left to individual judgments without any form of vetting at all? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other members? Okay. Councillor Trent.
Well, if I can come back, there have been many things that sort of motivated me to identify trees as something that needed to look at. One classic example was a tree issue which took 2 years to resolve, bounced from department to department. It involved our amenities and open space, it involved poor housing partnership, it involved planning. There were some rather atrocious mistakes made during the course of it, and planning suddenly decided out of the blue that their trees had TPOs, whereas everyone knew they didn't. And all of this, and there was a resident there waiting to be allowed to sort it out, prepared to pay for it to be sorted out. It did get sorted out in the end, and they were greatly relieved. And so, you know, there are things that haven't worked particularly well, and there's one that I've got at the moment, which I've got to go back to tree officers about, and that's actually fairly close to the kind of thing that Councillor Gabriel was talking about. There's a public bit of land, an isolated bit of land between what's going to be a development site and some houses. The trees are on flat land. The gardens of the houses go down quite dramatically, so the branches are quite a long way up to the residents, although they're low down, and people along there have had their greenhouses and conservatories broken by absolutely massive pine cones. And I think I sent you a picture of one of the cones earlier on, actually, amongst some other stuff. And so there are management issues that do need dealing with. What I wanted to avoid, which is why I've kind of mentioned all aspects of it, is I don't think, you know, we should have a sudden, you know, suddenly we're, you know, chopping trees back left, right and centre, you know, which is why we've got to have, you know, much clearer policies. This particular case with these, you know, houses which are down a hill for some pretty substantial trees, the policy, the pool legacy policy, which is still being followed, is crystal clear that they won't be replaced. But actually, if we have the manpower, the ability to, or the person power, and the ability to look at these sites, I think anyone would look at it and say, yeah, there is a problem there, isn't there? And it affects the people down below. So I think there's a whole panoply of things that need to be looked at and dealt with and improved. And I think between now and September 2022 would be a really good opportunity to get it right. Let's make the BCP policy on trees, you know, the best it can possibly be. And you know, let's try to kind of hit all bases.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Before I summarise, there's a couple of things I'd just like to add to it. Councillor Anderson, is there anything you wanted to add before I do that?
My only comment, Chairman, is that, as I said at the beginning, we are in the very early stages of the Green Infrastructure Strategy. I have given you the link, and I hope every member of this committee will be commenting on that strategy. I've also mentioned that we have an update coming up in, I think, the 3rd of August or the 5th of August, but early August, where we will have a presentation and members will again have a chance to comment on it and get involved. And once the Green Infrastructure Strategy has been done, we will then be looking at the tree strategy as part of the umbrella of strategies we're preparing for as part of the Green Infrastructure Strategy. And then under the Green Infrastructure policy, under the tree policy, we will deal with the contractual issues of how we actually maintain them and what we do, etc. So this is the part where we'll be talking about the replacements, the impact with input with planning, etc., etc. So I would welcome all comments to the Global Infrastructure strategy and the continuation as it goes down.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, okay, well, you know, there's been more questions and answers tonight, a whole range of issues, and it's clear, I think, from the debate that there is definitely an appetite for carrying forward with this to see if we can constructively come up with some ideas that can be included in the policy that officers are working on. One of the areas I think that it's not been mentioned, well, it's been touched on, and that is the way that we respond to our residents in terms of their tree request orders, which actually you're not the only one that's experienced a 2-year wait for something like that, because you know, that other people have had similar experiences. It's about how we provide that service to our residents that they're satisfied with. That's one element of it. I think that from the planning perspective, I did actually suggest earlier in the year that the planning committee did monitor the TPO applications, etc. I was very disappointed that the audit and governance decided that wouldn't be necessary, because it was something previously done at the Bournemouth planning meetings periodically, because what we're talking about here is a kind of a democratic deficit in a way. Who is actually overseeing the activities of the tree management on behalf of our residents? And at the moment, I'm not sure I know where that sits. So I think that would be. So what I would propose is that at some point we would set up a working group to work with this. Now we do have a bit of a problem here in that we're fully engaged with the local plan at the moment, and incidentally the local plan does have a big part to play in terms of policy about trees. And then we've also on the waiting list of working groups got another one lined up for enforcement. If you recall, we decided we would set one up for enforcement, and we were going to try to squeeze that one in when the local plan working group stood down for a few weeks. But we do have time, because the trees policy, as Councillor Anderson has said, is not coming out for quite some time. But I think that towards maybe the end of this year, possibly, we will have time to set up a working group to look at this issue. So if you're really interested in that, just let me know. If you want to volunteer, then let me know. And what we'll do, I'll just take an action to put it in the commission work in the forward plan for a working group to be set up at a date TBN. And then we'll take it forward from there. Thank you. So I think with that, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Thank you very much for your input. Thanks all the officers for turning up this evening. We didn't engage with them too much, I'm afraid. Hope they don't mind us talking to you that much, but thanks very much for your help. And we will look forward to hopefully being able to offer some useful ideas for your trees. Thank you. So with that, that brings us to agenda item 7, scrutiny of community safety related cabinet reports, and the subject is public spaces protection order. And good evening, Councillor Mayhain. She's here as the portfolio holder for community safety, who's going to introduce this report. Oh, sorry, just a moment. Wait, it's okay, it's going. Mr. Spracklin, thank you very much for your input today. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you, James. If you'd like to introduce the report, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening, members of the committee. So, as the Chairman has said, this paper is about the Public Space Protection Order, or PSPO, because otherwise it's a bit of a mouthful. And it is intended to deal with a particular nuisance or problem in a specific area that is detrimental to the local community's quality of life. Now, there's been evidence to suggest that these behaviours have to be persistent or of a continuing nature. There is evidence to confirm that much of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole areas does suffer from persistent alcohol-related antisocial behaviour. So our legal department has advised that the restrictions within a PSPO need to be specific to types of behaviour, which is having a detrimental effect, and that wide-ranging clauses within such an order, such as behaviour which causes harassment, alarm or distress, are thought to be too broad to be included in a PSPO. So with the advice from legal in mind, options were explored as to what should and could be included in this PSPO, and the following were considered. So we considered drinking alcohol and being antisocial, so i.e. alcohol-fueled antisocial behaviour, possession, supply or use of intoxicating substances, and then this one which I touched on, behaviour which causes or is likely to cause nuisance, harassment, alarm or distress to another person. So other options to include issues such as overnight camping and use of barbecues on our beaches were also considered. So on further consultation with our legal department, the option of behaviour which causes or likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress to another person was not seen to be specific enough and was too broad to be included successfully in a PSPO. Then possession, supply or use of intoxicating substances. These are criminal in nature and can be dealt with under other existing legislation. So similarly, there are existing bylaws that cover enforcement of overnight camping and use of barbecues on our beaches. And some of these, like for example, the overnight camping and the use of barbecues, are also seen as seasonal issues, and at the time of consideration did not meet the threshold of being persistent in nature. So the advice from legal was that these should not be included in the PSPO, as they were already covered under other existing legislation and therefore should be enforced using this other alternative legislation. So after all that work, it was therefore concluded that the most effective order would be one that gave the police and authorised council officers the power to confiscate alcohol from those behaving in an antisocial manner in all areas of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, where this is seen to be a persistent problem. Information was then gathered from a number of sources, including Dorset Police, our Parks and Open Spaces departments, Seafront Services, CSES officers, and complaints to our ASB team to demonstrate that there is evidence to show that much of BCP is impacted in a persistent manner by adults behaving in an antisocial manner in public spaces whilst consuming alcohol. While it's not mentioned in the guidance, Chair, the factor of potential displacement as a result of excluding areas from a PSPO, it's not included in the guidance, but we actually gave this consideration. And from the evidence and information gathered, it was concluded that all wards, with the exception of 4, Broadstone, Bearwood and Merley, Commons, and then Highcliffe and Warkford, these have been excluded because there was lack of evidence to satisfy the threshold required of a persistent behaviour that was continuing in nature. So again, it was also deemed that these areas, because they're primarily residential, that displacement would not be an issue. So as is required, a consultation was carried out, and this was the responses from the consultation are set out in paragraphs 30 to 35 of your report. It ran from the 16th of March to 13th of April this year, with 294 responses received. 248 responses were from residents and there was clear support for the order, with 89% strongly agree, and then only 8% disagreed with the consultation. So, Chairman, if this PSPO is approved by Cabinet, the schedule is to have it in place to commence on the 1st of July, which would actually coincide with the proper summer season, if we do have a summer, because the weather's been a little bit up and down. And so that's all I want to say on it. I am now happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members. Councillor Trent.
Someone might as well start. I think displacement and also times, I don't think this is a summer problem. There were some awful problems in Ashley Road just before the CSAS officers kicked in. When the CSAS officers kicked in, I was getting complaints of similar behaviour and drug trading and stuff like that going on from Branksome Rec, about half a mile away or so. And so I think we do have to be mindful of displacement. And I think rather than exclude complete wards, I would have thought it would have made sense to have covered the the public bits of those wards, like Broadstone, you've got the main Broadway bit, and I'm sure Vicky will have something to say about it. You've got the main Broadway bit where I've heard over the years of, you know, issues there, and you know, and that, you know, because it's places where people gather and congregate or are attracted to, that become an issue. And you know, I do think that, you know, we need to be very careful about displacement, and we also need to be able to follow it up in an effective way. You know, sort of these people that are causing problems on Ashley Road, some of them apparently went to Alexandra Park and started causing issues there. Other ones went to Branksome Wreck. But, you know, that was actually more out of sight and harder for the police to monitor than what was going on originally. But as I say, it had got quite unpleasant during the winter. I only, much as someone's discussed, only made a monthly visit to Ashley Road to go to the bank because we were on something called lockdown. But, you know, sort of, you know, we need to make sure that we don't cause displacement by leaving areas out that should be included, and also not assume that this is going to be the thing that's going to kill the problem, because I think there are underlying problems underneath all of this antisocial behaviour, and it's drinking. Drugs weren't mentioned, but I think drug culture and the use of intoxicating substances is quite a significant part of it as well. So, you know, that's just basically my thoughts anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. So displacement is going to cause a problem, Councillor May. Is that right?
No, Chair, as mentioned, it's actually in the report. We were mindful because the guidance on when you have a PSPO, what are the thresholds you need to meet, it doesn't actually make any reference to potential displacement impact. That is actually in the guidelines, but we as council, we were mindful that actually there could potentially be displacement issues. So for example, I think if you look at the town centres, if you look at specifically Poole and Bournemouth Town Centre, if you only have the PSPO in those areas, then it could potentially spread and spread and spread. But I think when we looked at it, we had collected the evidence from the police, our open spaces and parks people, our CSAS officers, and our ASB officers, all the calls that they've had, and which ones were actually alcohol fueled related. And there was insufficient evidence to actually support the 4 wards that have actually been excluded. And because it was felt that at that time of the consultation and at the time when the evidence was collected, that because they were sufficiently far out, that displacement wouldn't be an issue. And hence, that's why they have been excluded. So we have taken into account the potential impact of any displacement this may have by excluding those 4 wards. And as I say, it was all to do with, did we have sufficient evidence to prove that we could justify having a PSPO in, well, not just those 4 wards, but in all the other wards within BCP. And there was insufficient evidence available for to support extending the PSPO to those 4 wards, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the view. Anybody else? Councillor Dedman.
Yes, Chairman, it is a bit on the evidence. If Councillor Haynes could help me on it. The wards excluded and the insufficient evidence. I'm looking at 25 on page 65, and there are a couple of figures here. 20 reports per month in central Bournemouth, Poole Town 10 reports per month. Councillor Haynes, is there any other version of these figures? Because I'd be really interested to see the figures, you know, that have mandated this report, and which areas. If it is a sort of a difficult topic, then obviously I won't ask for them. but I think it would be interesting to know, because Christchurch isn't mentioned there, but Christchurch, and we've had an order anyway at Christchurch for some time in the town centre. But I'm just interested in the figures. You've got 2 figures here, but no more.
Sorry, Chairman, can
Yeah,
I?
Chair, yeah, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank Councillor Dedman for that question. I think it's a good one, but I'm going to have to be honest and say I don't have the other figures to hand, but I can ask officers to actually provide those figures to not just to Councillor Dedman. If everyone else on the committee would like to see those figures, then that can be arranged.
Members, there's a few people nodding. Yes, general consent is they would like to see them. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Slade, I think you're next.
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask a question regarding the limitations of the PSPO, because when the paper came to Cabinet last September and we removed some clauses from the previous PSPO that we believed were targeting homeless populations, we also asked the Director of Communities to progress other options, particularly around the issues of beach camping. And I note that wasn't progressed, and I've spoken to Kelly Ansell about the reasoning behind that. And the reasons I was given was around the pre-existence of other legislation, i.e. the bylaw, and the potentially seasonal nature of it, and therefore it wouldn't meet we see some sort of challenge around the PSPO, which I'm quite happy to accept. My concern is that was in September last year, and I know that information was discovered very early on, and yet I can't see anything that suggests what we are doing as an alternative to the bylaw, and also for other antisocial behaviours that we're seeing an increase in, and why I seem to be hearing that we're going to do something, but it feels like it's been rather a long time coming. That this is great, we can get this in place the 1st of July, but we have already had 5-6 weeks of summer, and we have had the busiest, massively busy weekends. So if we aren't yet starting to do anything alternatively around beach camping or litter and things, when are we likely to see something on that as well? Because that's another issue for us.
Councillor Hayes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, in response to the points that Councillor Slade has raised, I think she's sort of partially answered the question herself by saying that the advice that we had from legal was that where there's existing legislation, and that includes bylaws, then we shouldn't be using a PSPO, would therefore not be appropriate to actually use. So the beach camping, whilst it's not part of this PSPO, because this PSPO relates solely to giving authority to police and authorised officers to confiscate alcohol, but on the camping, and I will also include on there the barbecuing on the beach, there are existing bylaws that cover them, and with the barbecues, there's no barbecuing on the beach before 6 p.m. and then with the overnight camping is basically there's no overnight camping. And we have actually in the summer, we are now 5 weeks in, as Councillor Slade has said, and we had the weekend just gone has been very, very busy. The week before it was reasonably busy. So just as an example, for the camping, what we're doing is we have overnight security, which go and give hourly wake up calls to those who are staying there overnight. And last week, I think it was at least 12, up to 12 tents, campers, groups of campers in the Southbourne area. They were basically, they left because they didn't want to be woken up anymore. And then just the weekend just gone, we had 9 that we actually then dealt with, and then they packed up and they left. So it is working. And I'm going to be the first one to put my hand up to say, yes, we have a plan, but no plan is perfect. But from what we've seen so far, the plan in general it's working. It may not work every single time because we can't have everyone at the same place at the same time, because we have got 15 miles worth of beaches. We've also got some parks and open spaces. So on the parks and open spaces in relation to camping, we are in the process of recruiting, actually just this week, an officer, a CSAS officer that would specifically cover parks and open spaces to deal with things like camping, overnight camping there. So I hope that covers what Councillor Slade was asking. And then actually just to wrap up, Chair, whilst it's not strictly relevant to this paper, in terms of all the bylaws, they're rather odd if you look at some of them. So there is a piece of work that is just started to really look at all the bylaws that we have in BCP and see whether there was any way we can either replace them or combine them or harmonize them. But bylaws are a very odd beast in that they are written in a rather strange manner. So we are in the process of actually unpicking them to see where we can go forward with them.
Thank you. I've got a question for you, and it's interesting. You should talk about the bylaws, but one thing that isn't complex or is written in fairly simple English are the signs that are posted up on the lampposts around Bournemouth Square, which basically says you're not allowed to drink there. Now, I'm just wondering, what is this PSPO going to do that those, I assume, bylaws that exist already is going to do? Because clearly the bylaws don't seem to take any effect, and why should this PSPO be any better?
Okay, so with Bournemouth Square, I have to say I haven't actually seen the signs. I've been to Bournemouth Square a few times. I must look harder next time, Councillor Bartlett. But what this PSPO will do is it will give, as I said, it would give CSAS officers and police officers the ability to confiscate alcohol from anyone over the age of 18, because there's already legislation that would allow them to confiscate from anyone under 18. So this covers the other age range upwards. If it's assessed that the consumption of alcohol is causing them to behave in an antisocial manner. It's not an alcohol ban as such. I can't really comment on that bylaw about no drinking in the square, but in terms of what this PSPO will do is it will actually then give the ability to confiscate the alcohol. And of course, I talked about the word persistent quite a lot. What will happen is if the person then continues to behave in an antisocial manner, obviously either CSAS or police, whichever officers dealing with this individual, will say you need to stop that behavior. But if they persist, and if they come back, they persist, then they will be issued with a warning to say you mustn't behave like that. And if in the course of a period of time they continue to behave in that manner, the next thing would be they would be issued with a notice to say you have to stop this sort of behavior. And obviously if it continues and they don't stop, then they will then lead to be issued with what we call an ASB injunction, which means that they will have to stop. And if they breach that injunction or caught breaching that injunction, then they could be taken to court, they could be fined, and there will be various different types of penalties that can be imposed.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes, but it didn't really answer my question. There are areas of the town and the gardens where you're not allowed to drink alcohol. So if you're not allowed to drink it, why on earth would you require a PSPO? Sorry, did you want to speak, Councillor? Yeah, why would you need a PSPO as well? Because there shouldn't be anybody there drinking in the first place. Whilst I accept and welcome the PSPO, I'm just wondering why existing legislation is not working or not being enforced. Because if that was being enforced, then you wouldn't need the PSPO.
It could be, and I'll bring I'll probably bring Andy Williams, who's also on this call here. I think that we had previously had what was called DPPO, so they were the predecessors to PSPO. And this PSPO will actually also replace all existing DPPOs. So it's not an alcohol ban, because my understanding is that actually it is not possible to actually have an alcohol ban. So I'm afraid I don't have the history behind those signs in Bournemouth. So if I could perhaps, Chair, ask Mr. Williams to come in on that to clarify.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Williams. That would be welcome if you could just clarify the position on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the signs you refer to do relate to the old DPPO in Bournemouth, which is now come to an end. Those signs will be replaced with new signage as and when the Cabinet report is approved. And those signs will make it clear that it's not an alcohol ban in these areas, but it, as Councillor Haynes described, it makes it an offence to continue drinking when asked to stop by a constable or CSAS officer, and allows those officers to confiscate alcohol as well. So I think some of the old signage in various places did say that drinking was banned, and that's across the conurbation. But the DPPOs were not an alcohol banning area; they were a control area.
Okay, thank you. But the question still remains, it didn't control anything, because the fact is that people continue to drink in and around the square from morning to night, you know, and I think you understand the behaviours that I'm talking about. So, you know, what will make this different, this PSPO? Why will this work and the other one didn't work?
I think it is about the behaviour. It's not about the actual drinking of alcohol. So people are allowed to drink alcohol in areas covered by PSPOs. It's only when their behaviour causes antisocial behaviour that officers will be able to deal with that. I think what will make this work in a much better way is that we've got now many more CSAS officers in our town centres. We're just recruiting more into Bournemouth, and we'll have more in Poole as well. And the area of operation for CSAS actually covers the whole conurbation as well, so we can move them around if there are other particular hotspots. I think Councillor Trent talked about how well it's worked up at Ashley Road in dealing with some of the issues that we've got there. So I think that's one of the differences that we will see.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams. Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. So this PSPO, I think where we've come from with the original pool one to where we've got here, I'm actually quite supportive of it. I mean, I think I've made my feelings well known about how, you know, the PSPOs in general and how they were used to target certain demographics. So with this one as it is now, as it stands, it looks good. But just can you give me some confidence that it's going to be used not to target certain people consistently, because it still could be. I mean, this PSPO now, for example, covers all of our beachfronts. If there's people drinking anywhere during the summer months and causing nuisance, harassment, alarm, distress, it tends to be large groups who are coming visiting, getting tanked up during the day. You know, we've all seen last year fights breaking out on the beach, various poor behaviours, even, you know, barbecues, leaving litter. Any of this could be classed as a nuisance. So will this be used to enforce against groups like that on the beach, or are we just going to be focusing on known street drinkers in town centres and high streets?
Councillor Haynes.
Chair, could I? Yeah.
Yes,
Could
please
I
do.
respond, Chair? Yeah. Yes. Thank you for those points, Councillor Rigby. And the answer to your question is, the PSPO will be used to target behaviours, not individuals. And what it will do is it will actually be an additional tool in a suite of other tools that we already have to actually deal with antisocial behaviour, because antisocial behaviour may not necessarily be alcohol related. It could just be someone going around just behaving badly and I don't know, throwing litter at people or whatever they may do, creating a lot of noise, etc., etc. So this is purely to target alcohol related. So what it does is that it will actually give the ability to confiscate the alcohol. That's what this PSPO will do. So it is a behavior, and and it has to be persistent. So it's not to target any particular individual, but if you're referring to the large gatherings that can and have actually been happening in along the seafront, we obviously, as part of the summer planning, we work very closely with the police, and what the police will do is use this as one of the tools that they can take the alcohol off the group, the people, if it's felt that they are already merry enough and don't need to have any more alcohol. They will actually take the alcohol off them and then dispose of the alcohol, and then basically engage with them to say, you need to stop this behavior. And if you're talking about maybe certain individuals, and if it is then as part of the engagement process, it is discovered that the person actually has other issues, so the drinking of alcohol is one aspect, but then there are other further issues relating to that individual, then what can then happen is that we can then signpost the individual to actually get whatever help they may need in order to kind of, deal with either their addiction or whatever other issues they may have. So to be clear, it is to target a behavior, not any individuals specifically.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Allison, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I wanted to pass on my support, really. I think I'm very much in favour of the PSPO as it exists now. We had a lot of problems with the old Poole PSPO and the Bournemouth PSPOs, and I think this is a safe sort of middle ground, and it deals with the immediate problem of alcohol-related problems, but it doesn't really extend any further than that, and that's kind of what I'm happy with. This is exactly the kind of policy I think I would have taken forwards to. Thank you.
Is there anybody else, members? Councillor Gabriel.
Thanks, Chair. I was just saying, anything that makes our residents and our visitors safer is a good thing, which obviously this policy is going to do. I think the only question, perhaps for Mr. Williams, is the training for our colleagues and support staff. I'd imagine obviously everyone's definition of reasonable is going to be different. So obviously they're going to have thorough training so they can make sure we've got a standard approach for what's nuisance, harassment, alarm, etc.
I don't know, do you want to answer that, Councillor Haynes, or do you want to revert to Mr. Williams?
I'll just say a few words and then I'll hand over to Mr. Williams. Yes, I think certainly the police, they have their own training, but in terms of our CSAS officers, they all have to be accredited, and they go through what I call an induction process, so the details of which Mr. Williams will actually be able to provide. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can assure members that all of the officers from CSAS will be appropriately trained and briefed in the use of the PO powers. It is a discretionary power, so it does come at the officer's discretion as to when, to some extent, when they see that behaviour which is causing antisocial behaviour or likely to cause antisocial behaviour, but they're very experienced in dealing with these types of issues, so I don't think there's any problems there. And as Councillor Haynes says, also the police would have their own training, their own briefings on how to use these powers.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Members, I think that probably concludes the debate on this. I think it's fair to say that we're all in support and supportive of this PSPO, Councillor Haynes. We wish you well with it, and we hope that it's as effective as we all hope it will be. So thank you very much for presenting the paper this evening. Thanks to Mr. Williams as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Which brings us then to agenda item 8, which is the annual review of the housing wholly owned companies. And I think we've got Councillor Bob Lawton here, who's the portfolio holder for homes, to introduce the report. Good evening, Bob.
Hi, Chairman. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Would you like to go ahead and introduce the report?
I'll just say a few words on the operations of the Seascape companies. As everybody's aware, Seascape is an operation which was set up a number of years ago under the old Bournemouth Council. There is only one shareholder, that was originally Bournemouth and it's now BCP. All profits and operational profits which those companies make are returned to the centre to help keep council tax at a reasonable level for the residents of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. This report gives a review of the following companies of Seascape South and Seascape Homes and Property. As we all appreciate, this has been a difficult year for Seascape with the pandemic and the COVID. It's not been a great year in terms of operational profits, and it's able to facilitate and help people within the Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch area. I'll start off mainly, first of all, with Seascape South. Seascape South is a building operational company. We mainly do disabled facilities grants, which is the main source of income for the council. These are grants where people who have various degrees of disabilities, whether they need a wet room or wheelchair access or even a stair lift, that sort of thing, which Seascape South does. It also carries out refurbishments of libraries. It's just hopefully soon to do one which is near to your heart, Councillor Bartlett at Ensbury Park. And it also carries out a lot of work on schools, etc., etc. The difficulty that we've had this year with the pandemic, it has curtailed the operation of the company, where we've had to furlough staff. And lastly, the activity has been, as I say, severely affected by the pandemic. The end of the financial year for Seascape South was not as positive as we would have hoped. We only had a profit of £7,000, where we had a budget of 70,000 plus. So obviously it's quite significant effect on the profits for that operation, but I'm confident going forward, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, that I believe that we're on track. Seascape Homes is another operation which was set up under the old Bournemouth Council and is now wholly owned by BCP. Is an operation where we set it up to make sure that we fulfill our legal obligations towards homeless people or people who are being evicted, etc. One of the dilemmas and the reason we did it was that I found certainly, when the officers came to me to look at this company, was that we had a lot of single parent families with young children who had been evicted or made homeless for various reasons, and then we found them, we happened to put them into B&B accommodation, which is not an ideal situation if you're a single parent with young children. So this operation, we purchased quite a number of properties. In fact, we borrowed 45 million from the Public Works Board. We still have about 11 million of that 45 left, and we've actually purchased 98 properties, which have given us over 200 lettable homes within the BC, primarily Bournemouth, but some in Poole as well. And that allows us to accommodate people who are being made homeless, as I say, for various reasons. That has been, again, curtailed, and the operation of it was slowed down quite considerably because of COVID. We couldn't gain access. People weren't allowing you into their homes if we wanted to purchase them, etc. So the Seascape Homes has a forecast loss of £19,000 this year, where we were hoping for a £3,000 budget, a positive budget. I must emphasise on the Seascape Homes, it was never set up to be a commercial operation as such. It was always set up, hopefully, that it would wipe its own face. That is, it would break even, and that is the whole purpose of it, so that we carry out our legal obligations to help homeless people. On the Seascape, just finally, on the Seascape build, or the Seascape South, we're finding that we're actually going quite well coming out the pandemic. It's been a difficult situation, but we're starting to motor quite frequently. And in general terms, I must say, as a general comment, the building industry is going really at a pace at the moment. We're finding it difficult as an operation to find good quality skilled operators. And we're also finding, which probably we're all aware of and seen on the news, that raw materials, timber, etc., piping, has jumped quite considerably in price over the last few months. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, and I'll take questions. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just think well, I think you covered it, Councillor Lawson, that really the very small surplus that's made by one company and the small debit, they're not there to make profit. They are there to provide public service to really needy families, and I would be a bit shocked if we were making significant profit. So the fact we're sort of, even through the pandemic, we've managed to roughly cover our costs is probably a success, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I'm through the chair. I'm sorry. I'm really pleased that as I say, when we set up Seascape Homes, it was never set up as to be a purely profitable commercial operation. And as I said earlier, if it wipes its own face, I'm pleased.
Thank you. Other members? Councillor Cox.
I guess, it's only one thing I wanted to just raise was that it's a hobby horse of mine. The audit fees that have doubled as a result of the pandemic is absolutely appalling. I've never ever seen in commercial in the private sector audit fees double because of the pandemic. Quite the reverse. Some have had some clients that want a reduction, but a doubling of audit fees. I mean, that seems extraordinary.
Yeah, please go ahead, Councillor Norton.
Sorry, Chairman. I tend to sympathise with your sentiments, Councillor Cox. It has increased quite considerably, much to my annoyance. But we did carry out a legal duty of a normal procurement exercise on price and quality, which was conducted in April 2020. And to appoint the external auditors, and we found that this operation Hickson's were the most viable one for us. But I do tend to agree with you. Prices have gone up quite considerably in the building trade and through auditors, etc., which I can't quite understand why auditors have increased their prices so much. But there we are. But I do sympathise with your sentiments.
Well, I declare an interest immediately. I am an auditor. I run a firm of auditors, and I don't increase my prices at all. If anything, I tend to freeze them at this point in time. So I do think that the council is being ripped off, personally. There is absolutely no reason for them to double, which is what they have to do. I can understand some increase, perhaps, but certainly not a doubling. I do feel actually strongly that the council is being ripped off. And if you've just done an exercise, which I applaud, you're doing an exercise to get new auditors, that's fine. But for them to double their prices in the first year, just because there's a pandemic, that seems opportunism at the highest order, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, through the chair, sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I take on board what you're saying, Councillor Cox, and as I said earlier, I do have some sympathy with your sentiments. I can certainly revisit it, or ask the officers to revisit it to see that we can challenge the extra 10,000, which you rightly say appears on paper to be excessive. But yeah, I'll take that on board, and I'll certainly do something about it. Thank you.
Whilst we were talking, I did actually wonder, Councillor Norton, why is the council's external auditor, who used to actually audit the accounts of the Seascape Homes, is that withdrew from doing them? And I don't know why they did that. I just wondered if you were aware of why they did that, which has now forced you to go to somebody new, I understand.
No, they decided that they no longer wish to do it. I don't know why. They know. I'm not aware of a reason, I must be honest, of why they withdrew. We did use them for a number of years, and I can't quite understand why they withdrew, but they decided that they would, I don't know, that would something we need to ask them. They never, as far as I'm aware, I need to speak to senior officers. As far as I'm somebody like Adam, as far as I'm aware, they never gave a reason. They just decided they no longer wish to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Slade?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this report, Councillor Lawton. I've got a couple of quite simple questions. The first thing is, and if you were listening earlier, you might be expecting this question. In late 2019, early 2020, we approved the business plan, the 5-year business plan for Seascape, and Councillor Beasley was heavily involved in that, and I think remains a director. I was a bit disappointed not to see the business plan attached for ease of reference for the benefit of members of the committee. And although I recognise that the activities for last year have been severely impacted by COVID, it would have been good to be able to see that business plan and actually see how we've done against it. So if it's appropriate, may I ask in future that we have that, because I just think that would be useful for those people that don't know it very well. Secondly, the other thing that we did in that governance process was we approved and asked for a company secretary to be appointed, but I don't see any update on that, and I'm a bit concerned that a year on there doesn't appear to be a permanent company secretary. And again, I know COVID's got in the way, but I can't understand why that would have got in the way of appointing a company secretary. And finally, I'd just like to extend a vote of thanks to Dan Povey, because I know he's leaving and he was brilliant on this, and I note that there's an interim person, but I meant to say it earlier when we were doing the MTFP, so if he's not listening, can you pass on our thanks, because I think he'll be greatly missed.
Thank you. Members? Any more? Yeah, sorry, if you wanted to come back on that. Thank you, Councillor Lawton.
Yep. I'll just quickly come back to Councillor Slade. Yes, I'm quite happy for the business plan, which was set up some time ago, to be part of that. There was no reason why it shouldn't have been on as an addendum with this report, and we can do that in the future, so I don't have a problem with that. As regards company secretary, we did have a company secretary, and he left, and we're finding it difficult to re-employ, but that we are actively looking for a company secretary, because that's critical to the operation of all the operations, you say. And I totally agree with you. Dan Povey has been an excellent accountant. We have a temporary excellent accountant in Paul Whittles, who I've worked with before, found him a super guy. And we'll have to wait. Hit that appointment will only be temporary until that Dan's position has been filled. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions for you, Bob, and I agree, just to take up on the point that Councillor Slade made about the business plan, because when looking at this report, it really told me very, very little about what the companies were actually doing. There was nothing in terms of financial performance, turnover, forecast, or there was a comment about profit. But I felt, I really wondered what the report was actually saying. It wasn't really giving me very much at all. Although there were a couple of points that I did pick up on, and one is the intention that Seascape Homes may be providing a delivery vehicle for building out the pipeline of council-owned sites for private rent or private sale homes. And I just wonder, is that actually an approved strategy? And the question is, why would Seascape Homes, who are essentially a landlord and are good at being a landlord, why would they want to become a developer as well? I mean, when you think about it, you've got a vertical integration of the whole market there. The funding is coming from government borrowing. And then we own the land already. Then we're going to build it, and then we're going to rent it out. I mean, it's a big ask of any organisation, and I wonder what positions Seascape Homes to actually get into the developing side of the market, as well as all the good things that they're already doing in acting as a landlord.
You want to quickly answer that one, Chairman?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. We're not proposing that Seascape Homes turns into Taylor Wimpey or Wimpey Taylor, whatever it's called. It will do some developments, but they'd only be relatively small developments, you know, 5, 6, possibly 7 units. We're looking for it because obviously we need some income to support the rest of the operation. But in general terms, I do understand what you're saying, but there are no plans for it to turn into a big operational major developer within the Bournemouth area. It'll develop or build 1 or 2 units here and there.
Okay, I think that's probably the only. Oh, there was just one thing. BBML. There was a brief mention of BBML in the report, and it said that there would be a report coming forward for Cabinet later. It's not in the Cabinet forward plan at the moment, so if it is coming to Cabinet, could it be added to the Cabinet forward plan so we know when to expect it, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it from me. Anybody else? No. Thank you, Bob. No more questions for you. Yeah, so thanks for turning up. Sorry it's so late. Thank you. Okay, members. So I think there's nothing. There's no contention, I don't think, there anywhere on that particular paper. So nothing to recommend for Cabinet. So I think we basically accept the report as it is. Okay. So then we come to agenda item 9, future meeting dates. So they're all noted there. So unless there's anything else from any members, I close the meeting. Thank you very much.